I'll just formally introduce you. On behalf of Sama Audit Systems and Software Private Limited, I'm really happy to welcome all the wonderful participants and our distinguished speaker for today, Sandeep Baldawa. Sandeep I will formally introduce Sandeep to all of you. Before that, let me just say that Sama Audit Systems and Software Private Limited has been at the forefront in bringing audit solutions to auditors and finance professionals in the last 20 years in India, in the Indian subcontinent, and in the Indian subcontinent and few other countries around the region where we represent Caseware. So IDEA is the flagship solution. And then we have got LSA from London, which is the continuous control monitoring. We have got Smart Exporter, which is a ETL for SAP. There's Caseware Working Papers, which is a solution, end-to-end solution for the statutory external auditors in the region. And then, of course, there's consulting, the e-learning modules, training around analytics, which is being provided by our consulting team. So I think today we have got a number of installations in the country, in the government sector, in NGOs, in the private sector, in the professional CA firms. This program today is being supported by the Government of Canada, the High Commission of Canada, Trade Commissioner Service. And we hope that in future, as COVID subsides, we would be in a position to physically hold programs at the High Commission in New Delhi. To formally introduce Sandeep, today is the 37th edition of Analytics Wednesday, and Sandeep is going to speak on forensic data analytics. Recently, Sandeep has co-authored a book which has been released, which is a must-read, I would say, which is on forensic investigations and fraud reporting in India. Recently, a treatise on forensic investigation and fraud reporting, which I would recommend to all professional friends and across the country. Sandeep is a chartered accountant, a certified information systems auditor, and a certified fraud examiner. He has over 25 years of experience in this area, and he has led forensic investigations, fraud risk assessments, and anti-corruption review engagements for companies headquartered not only in India, but US, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And in his role as an international peer reviewer, he has performed reviews and forensic engagements across the globe, giving him unparalleled experience in this field. His forensics experience spans across sectors and business functions. So whether it be a complex forex transaction fraud or a revenue recognition fraud, to unraveling fund diversion, to cracking recruitment fraud schemes, to uncovering conflict of interest situations, he has deployed his forensic skills widely to crack complex cases. He has led for fraud risk assessments at leading corporates across sectors, pharmaceuticals, banking, technology, automobile, infrastructure, and he has led engagements in mergers and acquisition scenario, advising corporates and private equity firms on pre-investment forensic due diligence, as well as post-investment monitoring and investigations. So I think with such a lot of background to him, I would invite him to speak. And just to add on a personal note, I think our relationship, goes back. I met Sandeep 16 years back in Hyderabad. And since then, we kept bumping into each other, in conferences or meetings or, gatherings. So over to you, Sandeep, today to enlighten us so that,
Thanks a lot, Deepji, for, I think, first inviting me, and second, also the commendable job that you're doing for the profession. It's not easy to organize these sessions week on week on a continuous, basis. And I saw the list that you shared on the, group. It's amazing to see that on a consistent basis you are organizing these sessions, and again, different speakers. So I think what is important is we should have different perspectives, right? So you get different perspectives once you hear from a different set of speakers. So the best thing that I liked about that is completely different set of speakers from different backgrounds, coming and speaking. So it's commendable, and that also shows the personal rapport that all of us have with you, or you have with all of us. So where we don't think twice to come back and speak to you. Yeah,
that's my privilege, and that's really good, to have so many professional friends. So many friends in the fraternity.
Let me share my screen.
Yeah, please.
You're able to see the
Yes.
slide? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely clear.
Thank you. So I'll start off. So I'll just spend a minute on what Deepji described on the book. First, a disclaimer. So what I'll be presenting today is my personal, view, and nothing to do with the organization that I work for. So we just released this book. So this was, I think, a long, demand from a lot of friends that I capture my, experience on the forensic side. So I worked back with another colleague of mine who has already published 3 books. So we thought we would be able to, do a justice to this job. And we finally, sort of it took 10 months, but we finally, I think, released the book. So these are some of the highlights, but I'll not spend time on this, considering the focus of today's discussion is different. But the book substantially captures the concept of analytics as well as more on the predictive analytics. So I would recommend, sort of you look at the, book, and would be great to give feedback, because in this area, there are very few, sort of publications available for guidance to people who want to, build career in the area of forensics and forensic data analytics. So if I set the context, today in terms of, I think, the environment that we are living in. So one, the number of frauds continue to rise. Right. So while the technology is implemented in different areas to reduce, the frauds, but I'll take you through in the next few slides how that is not helping, fully. And we see frauds happening across, different sectors, across different, geographies. So there is no let up in the number of frauds that are happening. The second thing that is, impacting corporates is because of the speed of operations, because of constantly changing business models, because the traditional businesses are, sort of reacting to the changes that are happening in their industry, because some, challenger is coming in the industry with a completely new business model, completely new kind of, sort of a technology. If you look at the banking scenario, nobody would have thought that you could get a loan within, 5 minutes, but today that is, possible. So that is forcing a lot of existing players, established players, to relook at their existing business models, relook at their existing processes, and implement new technology, implement new processes, which comes along with its own, sort of risks of, fraud that can happen because they are not fully familiar with the, technology. So in summary, one, the transaction volumes are increasing at a rapid pace, which is a good, sort of a scenario if you are a professional in the analytics space, because analytics will then help you, sort of provide your expertise to these organizations to prevent and then predict frauds, not just prevent. Now I'm using the word predicting, frauds. Then if you look at, the globally, not just in India, and this is the data that I have picked up from the latest, report from Association of Certified, Fraud Examiners. On an average, 5% of the, revenue is lost to, fraud by different organizations across the, globe. In some organizations, it may be 2%. In some organizations and sectors, it may be higher than, 5%. But on an average, it's 5%, that organizations lose on account of fraud. And one is the monetary, sort of amount that the organization is losing. The more important part today is the reputational damage that it causes and the management bandwidth that is invested in order to, address the issues that generate on account of the frauds. And in today's environment, everything is in public domain. And especially for listed companies, you are required to report on frauds and then any material, issues that are, happening. So that again creates a situation wherein the whole world is aware of the incident that has happened in an organization, and you are spending a lot of time, effort, and money to, address that situation. And it's a continuous, process. So today, the way we are living is, it's very difficult to say when and where, who will get impacted because of fraud. And fraudsters, the way they operate through their, thought process, they keep looking for opportunities, while we as citizens, as businesses, think that now we are, more connected. So we can operate our car through, sort of technology. We can operate our AC through technology. We can operate our, sort of, say, geyser or, sort of a microwave through technology. But for a fraudster, all these are providing extra entry points for them to, sort of get into your system and then, conduct or perpetrate, frauds. So it's a continuous process. So you don't know which, I think, sort of loophole you are leaving it open, which is allowing the fraudsters to come into the system and then, I think, perpetrate the fraud that they want to perpetrate. So we should be familiar, with the frauds that are happening. And this slide is busy, but it captures in summary form what is mentioned in the 2020 report to the, nation. Like I described, 5% of revenue to fraud is lost to fraud each year. And in several cases, if you see the hotline, the anti-fraud policy, the fraud training, these are the, I think, measures which help in sort of detecting frauds. And as part of this, internal controls and then forensic data analytics is emerging as a critical tool in order to prevent and detect frauds at an early stage of the fraud cycle. Because of the COVID scenario, the cyber frauds, the unemployment frauds, the frauds by vendors and sellers, the payment frauds and the identity thefts have increased. And in each one of these cases, data analytics and forensic data analytics can play a critical role to minimize the risk of fraud. It will never be zero because of the several false positives that it would create, but you can substantially minimize the risk of fraud over here. And if you look at the history over a period of time, I think what is happening is the entire analytical process has evolved. In earlier days, it used to be more like a post-mortem exercise. From there to now, I think it is a kind of an online exercise where on a online basis, as the transaction is going through, you need to do analysis and identify patterns to see if there is something happening within that transaction which should not be happening, or which is outlier, and you are able to address that immediately. Consider simple example that normally you initiate a banking transaction through your laptop, but then you are initiating a transaction through a phone. You immediately get a call that is it you who are doing this transaction, because our system has picked up that you normally sort of use a different system, a different IP, but today you're using a different system and a different IP. So should we go ahead and process the transaction? So that is a classic example of how from a post-mortem exercise, analytics has become an online exercise where you need to identify any flaws, any outliers as the transaction is happening and not after the transaction has happened. So analytics has a utility now before you sort of go ahead with a particular business model transaction, during the transaction, as well as to do a kind of what I call as a post-mortem analysis. So what is important over here is to understand that today we are living in a world where technology has enabled a lot of things. Before, I think, COVID, none of us imagined that we would be able to do work end-to-end from home. At least I didn't imagine that I would be able to carry out a forensic investigation end-to-end from a desk at my home. How will I do interviews? How will I get access to data? Unless I look at physical documents, how will I identify if there is modification to the document, etc., etc., etc. But I can tell you that over the last 2 years, we have seen that technology has helped substantially. I would not say 100%, but substantially to execute projects. We are able to do interviews. We are able to monitor, sort of body language during interviews. We are able to identify if the documents are, manipulated through, looking at logs, through looking at properties of the documents. So there are various ways in which technology is helping all of us, right from helping the government and the organization to deliver effective solutions to the citizens, to the employees, to the customers. And it has also helped in reducing corruption. Imagine, earlier if you needed a ticket 2 days in advance on any train across India, I'm sure you would have to, sort of pay some speed payment to get that ticket. But today it's all online. 95% of the transactions are clean. Same with IT returns. You file your return online. Even if they have queries, the queries come to you online and you're supposed to submit your responses online. So it's a faceless assessment that is, happening. So it is also, helping in mitigating frauds through GPS tracking, geotagging, and several other methods where you are able to ensure that if the goods are going, the trucks are not stopping in between to, for pilferage. There is a geotagging to ensure that the employee, if he or she is providing an address that is a genuine address, or somebody has actually visited the place to collect the data and not just filling up the forms in the back end. Or even if you look at your travel bills, they are able to monitor whether the vehicle has actually moved to the destinations or the locations that are described over there, or it has actually just sort of bill being submitted to you. It is also helping the investigators crack cases faster through use of analytics, through use of looking at the trends. The classic example I'll give here, which is being used extensively in India, is all the insider trading cases where analytics is being used heavily to identify abnormal transaction patterns, abnormal trades. From there, identify who all are in touch with the person who did the abnormal trade or the entity that did abnormal trade, and then identify ultimately the link with the person who is associated with that organization and identify the complete trail of how the insider information flowed and help the person or entity complete a stock market transaction that led to a benefit to that particular entity or organization. That's one example. Other example is trade-based money laundering, which is a case study that I will cover in the next few slides. Then important part over here is ineffective understanding of technology or over dependence on technology without sufficient knowledge of loopholes that are there or limitations that are there can give false sense of comfort. This apply to analytics as well. If we blindly use analytics in identifying outliers or identifying sort of abnormal trends, it can lead to several false positives, and as well as we devoting time and effort to unwanted areas or non-important areas, whereas focusing on the right areas. So understanding the technology and the loopholes is very critical. These are some examples. I'll not spend too much time on this, but just a couple of examples. We think that duplicate payments cannot happen on ERP systems, but it's possible to have duplicate payments even in ERP system. People can add a syntax like a hash or a ampersand or a @ etc., or they can just add a space, and still the duplicate payments can get processed. So when you are doing analytics, you need to understand what are the loopholes that are inherent in the system from which the data is coming to you before you start your analysis. Similarly, maker-checker controls will not work when the people are sharing passwords. Oh, we have only 2 licenses in a location, we have 10 people, so all the 10 people are using those 2 licenses. So if you do analytics thinking that there is a maker-checker control and based on that present results, those results will be inaccurate. The next example is on digital lending fraud, which is critical in the current environment, wherein people are able to disburse loans within 5 minutes. People are supposed to have a profile based on which they get a pre-approved loan, and they can sort of avail that loan. So what people are doing is they are building this profile electronically, so that by doing certain transactions, so that will help them get this approval. Now you need to understand the loopholes in this process and apply analytics before the loan is sanctioned. Otherwise, there are already examples in the banks where banks have lost money because people have taken the loan and then just vanished from the system. These are other examples including biometric attendance, different systems, GPS tracking. So we need to understand the limitations of the system and then the data that is coming from that system before you decide what analytics will work for your forensic purpose. So let me sort of start this with a question, and you can post your answer in the chat box. So you have 15 seconds to tell me how many crosses do you see over here. Your time is up. I don't see a single answer. Come on. Nil, 32, 1. So now let me explain you. So now tell me how many crosses do you see? You again have 15 seconds. Perfect. So the reason why I use this slide, it's a very simple slide, but very, impactful, is that when we have a lot of data, we all get, I think, confused with what to do with the data. So unless the data is analyzed in a structured manner, especially where the volume is very high, we may not be able to arrive at the right, decision-making points or right information for taking, decision. So it's important to first analyze the data in a manner that is easy for, interpretation. So that is the reason why analytics plays a very, important role, and we should all be, mindful about that. So what kind of analytics that you would use, it will depend on the, level of evidence that we need in a given circumstance. Either it is for an investigation purpose or for, proactive, purpose. Then the analyzing the numbers and the data can lead to new insights that were not articulated earlier before you started the process. It also depends on the specific situation and the need to exercise judgment in deciding whether analytics is appropriate in the given circumstances. Now help develop expectations about account data and then key financial relationships between different sets of data. So, and it also considers the trends and peer group comparison. So what analytics you will use, how much you will use, will depend on the circumstances in which you are using analytics, and also what is the purpose that you want to achieve through analytics. So let me give you an example of a large case where we used analytics to identify red flags in the trade-based money laundering. A trade-based money laundering is where the normal banking channels are used to perpetrate money laundering. So where the funds are actually moving through the banking channels, but the underlying documentation or the underlying substance of the transaction doesn't exist. So for example, I'm in the export business. So I sort of export cricket bats, and I say that my cricket bat is worth 1,000 rupees, and I export the cricket bat to say Middle East. But in reality, that cricket bat is just a log of wood worth 20 or 30 rupees, or at best say 100 rupees. And there is a duty drawback that I get by exporting the bats of 12%, so which is 120 rupees. So what I do is that I export these bats and get this duty drawback. In reality, the bats are not getting exported of the desired value, so they are at a very low value, just 10 rupees, 20 rupees, or 30 rupees. Against that, I'm earning 120 rupees. I'm just giving you numbers for the sake of it. The real numbers are different. And based on this process, the way I get the export incentive is only if I get the money into my account, in the designated account. So what I do is that I use a methodology to send the money out by creating fictitious documentation of imports for some other reason, and then get the money sort of out, the same money back into India through this channel. So we use analytics heavily to identify customer-wise cash deposit and the NEFT and the RTGS data. There are millions and millions of rows of transactions that we had to analyze, because there were more than 4,000 accounts over a period of 3 years where these transactions were happening across 59 different banks in India. So we used analytics first to identify the different types of tests that can be performed to identify outliers. For doing that, we first understood the end-to-end transaction, how it happens. One sample transaction was looked at from beginning till the end to identify how this transaction is executed. Then we looked at the different data sets, identified the common data sets that are relevant for us when the goods are going out or when the money is coming back, either ways. And based on that, then we analyzed the data from these different data points. Looked at the same sender with multiple account numbers, multiple senders with same account number, multiple beneficiaries having the same account number, the recipients, same beneficiary with multiple accounts, potential similarities between remitters and beneficiaries, either in terms of names, addresses, etc. Analytics on PAN data to identify duplicates. And we also looked at multiple customers who are using the same IP address to process their transactions. And I'll give you this example in the next few minutes, which actually helped us in cracking a much larger part of the case than we were doing with the other sets of data. Then on the transactional data, we looked at individual transactions below $100,000, but during the day, it was totaling to more than $100,000, because that was the limit within which you can actually export actually import the goods just based on pro forma invoice, and you don't need the bill of entry for that. Remittance on the basis of the same invoice, multiple remittances happening, because there was no concept of knocking off in the earlier IceGate system. Then customer-wise cash deposit analysis and the RTGS NEFT transfer analysis. Then anomalies in the alerts data that was generated. For example, we saw that the alerts were being cleared within sort of 15 seconds. So you had 1,000 alerts being cleared within 2 to 3 minutes. So which means the person was not actually looking at the real data and clearing the alert, but they were just clicking on the sort of system and then clearing the alert. In one toll sort of plaza, we found that the people had actually put weight on the enter button to make sure that the transaction just gets processed, which means they're actually not reviewing. How we identified that is based on, again, the analysis of the time taken for processing each transaction. So like that, you identify first the flow of the transaction, the data that is available at each stage of the transaction, and the quality of the data that is available, the period for which it is available, bring it into a common, sort of a, flow, and then run your analytics. So before you start your analytics, you need to understand what you're trying to achieve from that analytics, especially on the forensic side. So this is a classic example of how this was done. And then this helped us establish relationship between different accounts, both within India level, as well as identifying the link between the person who is sending money outside India plus the person who has received money outside India. On the face of it, they were different, but we are able to identify the link, and it's there in the newspapers now. Just a few weeks back, this case is reported. I don't want to name it for confidentiality reasons, but if you just type out in any newspapers the trade-based money laundering case, you will see how that was cracked, and then we work back with the relevant agencies to crack this case. This is how we identified that the same person is actually running multiple bank accounts, and then that's how we were able to link these multiple bank accounts, and these are all shell accounts and then shell companies. So what you need to do is when you are thinking about doing data analytics, and then today there is a lot of jargon that is being used. You have the concept of artificial intelligence, you have the concept of machine learning, then you have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, different jargons. The way I would like to think at it is, first you should be clear in terms of what you want to do with the data, what is the outcome that you're expecting, and for what purpose. Once you are clear about that, then you use the technology and then the tools that are available at different stages to do your data analysis, to do the next level of sort of use of AI, and then the subsequent use of ML. But what I want to alert is that for doing AI and ML, you actually need enough historical data and enough historical pattern for you to apply AI and ML on transactions. So people think that, okay, I have say 10,000 rows, I'll go and apply AI and ML on that. It's not, I think, that useful based on a practical experience that we have. When you have several million rows of data, that's when actually AI and ML plays a very important role in proactively identifying patterns and then outliers, which you can then use for subsequent analysis. So what are the different stages? You start with the basic data analysis, then you sort of do exploratory sort of analysis, different types of tests, identify sort of patterns over there, identify false positives. Then you do the confirmatory, where existing hypotheses about a certain situation are proven to be false or true. Then sort of look at the qualitative data analysis, which is the final stage. So you need to actually do this step by step to avoid a situation wherein, one, you are working on the wrong data, and I have seen that multiple times. You are working on incomplete data, you are working on data that doesn't belong to the period of review. You are working on that data where the key fields are incomplete, or where the key sort of what you call as the columns or the rows are not non-existent. So let's look at the example from a digital lending point of view. You can use analytics at the stage of customer identification, whether you are dealing with the right customer, and there are different databases available from you where you can pull the data, look at the CIBIL score, look at the Hunter application data, look at the social media data, etc., and then identify whether the customer that you are dealing with is the right customer to give a digital loan. Then look at the data that they are submitting. Based on that, you do your analysis and profiling, do the background verification on the customer, do the approvals and documentation, and then disbursement, and then analyze this data as the transaction is going on, not after the transaction is completed. So that is the, I think, most critical part of this analysis, wherein today the expectation is that the customer needs to be serviced in no time, in few seconds, minutes, or an hour. But at the same time, we need to manage our risk. We don't want sort of the risk to be higher. So you have the customer relationship management, customer service, ease of doing business on one side, and then managing the risk on the other side. So that's where you as professionals can play a role using analytics to identify patterns, to identify red flags that can help you sort of identify if there are any outliers in these applications which you should not process. So how do you do this profiling? Look at the historical repayment data from the CIBIL records, public records, look at the social media data, perform digital footprint analysis. When was the profile created? How it was created? Is it very common that the person goes, opens account, then closes it, has multiple email accounts, has multiple sort of Twitter accounts, etc. So you look at different things. to identify whether the customer is eligible for a sort of a digital loan or not. These are again different stages in which you can use, and then again the developments that are happening in the technology, including using robotic process automation. So right now, when we have to do, say, a fraud monitoring, what we are doing is we are using manual intervention around fraud vulnerable processes, where there is significant manual review of documentation, certification, and system data entry for regulatory reporting requirements. By using RPA, again, first you use analytics, then I think identify what you need to do. Again, RPA is not something of a rocket science. It's more of a sort of a program that you write to do certain steps in an automated way rather than a manual way. So for example, you want to do research on a customer on a social media to various databases. So you can write a program that will go and fetch data from different databases, different platforms, and convert it into a form of a report and give it to you. Similarly, you can sort of automate most of the vulnerable business functions and automate the pulling out data from different databases, including internal databases. Because what we have found, especially in the banking system, is that there are different applications that are there, and several of them are proprietary. They don't talk to each other. So you need to have a kind of a tool, analytics tool, that sits on the top of them and pulls data from all these different tools and puts those together, and based on that the analysis is carried out. Similar process you can follow for AML and customer identification. The last stage in this is using OCR technology to even read through and prepare data for documents that are not in the sort of readily usable form, where you are using text from emails, text from different sort of documents that are there. So these are I think the stages. Right now, if you ask me, most organizations are in step 1. There are some organizations that have moved to step 2. There are some processes within organizations which have moved to step 3. But I feel within next 1 to 2 years, most of the financial institutions will be at the stage 3, and we all can play a significant role in that process. So this is how the entire sort of process works, wherein you start with identifying the structured data, the unstructured data from different applications like I described, and then based on that you identify the fraud test that you want to do the text mining and then research on that, then create the monitoring and detection tools, create the investigation tools where they are identifying patterns that are happening, and that data then gets fed back into the initial set of data. And this is how the entire continuous monitoring happens using advanced analytics, which also uses an element of AI and ML as part of this process. And the tools today are equipped to sort of enhance themselves as they are going. But at the same time, I want to sort of repeat that they can always throw false positives. So at every stage when you are using this, please keep taking a sample and then checking whether that is yielding the desired result or not, and whether you are having unnecessary sort of false positives which would sort of jeopardize the entire exercise that you're doing. If you look at the cards and internet banking, you can actually use different sets of forensic data analytics, right from starting late night pin change and ATM withdrawal, post transaction from unusual location depending on the customer's profile, multiple balance inquiry in customer's account by a staff member and our frequent profile reviews, dormant card for past 12 months, later utilized for single transaction for withdrawal of more than 40% of the limit, new customer utilizing the entire card limit in the first 15 days of onboarding, age of customer greater than 70 years, card utilized for spending on gaming websites, cryptocurrency websites beyond 30% limit, etc., etc. So today the banks have already built in several of these analytics to help identify potential outliers or potential fraudulent transactions as they are happening. Now the need to enhance this is much more because of the speed at which transactions are happening, speed at which people are using technology to do internet banking, to use cards at different places. You have contactless transactions happening over there. So I think at a broader level, RBI has done a great job in terms of improving the overall security systems that we have, including two-factor authentication. When you get a card today, most of the transaction types are disabled. You need to actually go on the internet banking and enable those, or through WhatsApp, etc. So today, I think from a regulator point of view, they already done enough. We as professionals can work back with the financial institutions and make sure that they are using the right analytical tools, right, I think analytical, sort of procedures to help identify abnormal transactions while making sure that the transaction volume is not slowing down. So imagine a scenario where you run these analytics and then thousands of false positives are thrown while the transactions are running, and there are millions of transactions that happens on internet banking as well as on the card system. So it's not possible for them to stop all the transactions. They can just delay it by few minutes or seconds. That's why those you get those calls or the messages, but you can't, I think, sort of stop the transactions. So it is important to do the right sets of analytics to identify the right set of outliers when we are sort of doing this support to the banking system or any other organization. Banking I have used because there the volume is very high, and you can sort of actually do all kinds of analytics. So the best, I think, play that you want to do in analytics is in a industry where the volume is very high, which is telecom, which is say consumer FMCG or banking. So this is again just a example of how this entire process works. We already discussed this in detail, and how analytics is helping the financial institutions in addressing these challenges, and also using machine learning and AI in preventing these frauds. So how sort of rule-based and machine learning sort of analytics has changed. Under rule-based fraud detection, you had manual effort to list all possible detection rules. Here, automatic detection of fraud scenario happens based on usage of different algorithms. And as the system matures, as the data increases, this works extremely well. So I would say that in the initial stages, you need to use a combination of both till ML takes over, which normally I would say is at least a few months time where ML can fully take over the process. After that, also you keep testing if it is working properly or not. It's like in a manufacturing organization, if you remember when the Six Sigma concept was introduced, there were, I think, lasers and then sensors introduced within the manufacturing process. Let's take auto industry, auto components. Lasers were introduced during the manufacturing process where they used to test at each stage of the process if the product is right. Otherwise, they would stop that and then remove and put it in a different queue. The same logic and same methodology needs to be applied when we are doing analytics on any other transaction scenario. In rule-based fraud detection, it was long-term processing. It used to take a lot of time, and mostly it used to be in batches or a post-mortem exercise. Whereas in ML-based, it's real time, and you can identify the outliers as the transactions are happening. In rule-based, it's multiple verification steps. It degrades the user experience because it slows down the system. Whereas in ML, it's lesser number of verification measures because they already figured out over a period of time which one they need to focus and which one they need not focus on. Then detection of obvious fraudulent scenarios, where I think it's visible easily once they identify. Whereas in ML, it's detection of hidden patterns and patterns in the data, which normally you couldn't do through a rule-based, because the system is using its own algorithm to identify even new patterns that may be coming up as part of the data. Then structured data can be leveraged. In ML, you can leverage structured as well as unstructured data. So this is just an example of how artificial intelligence is sort of revolutionizing detection of frauds in the financial services. By 2023, the projection is digital banking penetration will be about 78%. I believe it will be much higher than that, because today everybody is using digital. Today, all the transactions are happening in digital manner. In fact, I would say that earlier people used to think that citizens at the bottom of the pyramid would use the technology lower. It's the other way around now. They are much more familiar in terms of using a Paytm, a PhonePe, a Google Pay, or a UPI transaction, because on the ground they are using that. And I would feel that this would be much higher. Then artificial intelligence would sort of revolutionize how consumers and companies access and manage their finances. It will also help them in identifying frauds as they are happening and not at a later stage. So if I look at now beyond just the data, today AI and ML is being used even in biometric solutions, in face detection and recognition of face detection. Whether it is a banking application that is being submitted, identifying if there is a identity theft that is happening over there, where the government is using it for quite some time for passport, verification. Law enforcement has been using it for, again, different, purposes. Plus, I think if you look at it today, in interviews, this is being used to identify if there is a person who has attended interview is different than the person who has actually joined the organization. So the system is today taking a photo and a video of the person who is attending the interview, because most of the interviews are happening through remote mode. And when the person joins, they are again supposed to come online and then show their face, and it's taken 2 or 3 times in the first month, and that is mapped with the initial photo and the video that was taken, and based on that they are identifying. It's a big issue in the IT industry today, where a lot of people are actually sort of getting somebody else to do the interview, and they are joining. And there is also an issue of moonlighting, wherein an individual is working for more than one. In some cases, it is found that the person is working on at least 3 to 4 organizations, because they are just on-call roles as a support function, and they operate in different shifts. So there are people who have gone to their hometown and earning maybe 2.5, 3 times the salary that they would earn earlier, because they are moonlighting over there. And AI ML through face recognition and then through biometric processes helping in identifying such frauds. The next stage over here would be natural language processing. It is still, I think, I would say, in evolutionary stage, but I think this would be sort of be the, I think, the destination that we see within, again, next 3 to 4 years times. It's a branch of artificial intelligence that would combine computational linguistic with the statistic model. So you have the analytics that you're performing, and there are algorithms and the statistical models available. When you combine these two, including using the text-based data, you'd be able to do much better analytics than what you're doing today. You can accelerate investigations through this. You can identify if there is an account takeover that is happening by not just looking at the analytical data, as we call as say from where they have logged in, etc., and then the password that they are using, the customer ID they are using, but also look at the data around the text, around the sort of chat, email, voice, and IVR interactions to identify if there is a potential account takeover that is happening. You will also use that to monitor communications to detect fraud intent across multiple categories and identify those before, and also use it for regulatory sort of regulatory submissions. I'll just add over here how banks in India are using analytics and this particular solution. There are a lot of compliances that they need to do. There are a lot of filings that they need to do, and they go back and commit that we'll do this to different, I think, stakeholders that are there, but they don't have all this combined at one place. So what I think these solutions are doing is they're combining all the regulatory requirements that the bank need to follow, both on a daily basis, periodic basis, as well as annual basis, into one place, then taking the data and analyzing that they're actually doing that, identifying what their commitments they have made, using again technology to identify if those commitments are being met, pulling data from different databases, analyzing that and confirming that we are actually sort of complying with the commitments that we have made to the regulators. So that's, I think, with that I come to the end of my session. I wanted to keep enough time for Q&A. So we have 15 minutes for Q&A. So Deepji, if you're okay, we can open the session for Q&A. Happy to answer any question. I have done more than 1,000 investigations. So please feel free to ask any question that you may have.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. I think any questions you have, this is a good opportunity to ask questions to him. Sandeep, before, I think I don't see any questions right now, but I have 1 or 2 questions, based, it was a wonderful presentation. First is, okay, let me take the question from the participant first.
Sure.
Sir, how can we spot potential corruption schemes using data analytics?
Yeah, so I think it's already being used. I'll put this into 2 different parts. So one is where the government is using it to identify if, say, somebody has filed an application and then it is getting delayed beyond a normal time. So those are getting picked up in the back end, and then people are being asked questions. So why this particular application has not been cleared within a reasonable time? What are the reasons for that? And they also started a concept of deemed approval. So if a particular application is not cleared within say a 30-day period, it will be deemed, approved. So that's how the government, I'm giving a very simple example. There are a lot of, I think, areas where this is being used. Now within corporates, they are using analytics to identify if there is again, how do you identify corruption? Because corruption happens outside of the system. It doesn't happen within the system. So you identify patterns within the system which indicate that there is a favoritism that is being passed on to a particular vendor. I'll give you an example which I think I covered in detail in the book. So you find that when you analyze the data of a particular sort of a product purchase, you identify that a particular vendor is always the last vendor to submit the quotation. So their quotation is always the last. You look at last 3-year data, on a month-on-month quotations are submitted, but their quotation is always the last. Then you go back and look at the pattern. You find that their rates are always sort of just 1% or 0.5% lower. And in this case, it was like 100 line items. In each case, this was for stationery. In each case, the rates were just 10 paisa, 20 paisa, 30 paisa lower than the other quotations. So through that, they identified that there is a pattern, and this was done through analytics because the volume was very high. It was a multinational organization with operations across India, 44 different locations they are operating. So the volume was very high. So they identified this pattern, and then first they consolidated that pattern that is happening on a regular basis. Then they ran obviously keywords and others to identify the link between this employee and then the vendor who was submitting these quotations, and identify financial transactions between them. So how do you identify corruption? You identify patterns that are abnormal in the transaction scenario and in the process, and then based on that you identify if there is a favoritism that is being pursued to a particular vendor or a party which is quoting, and then based on that you identify corruption. You can't directly identify corruption, you identify pattern and then identify corruption.
Sure. There's a question from Shiva Kumar ji. First of all, he's saying excellent presentation. He's the Chief Internal Auditor ISRO, and what he's saying is excellent presentation and insights to forensic fraud. I think in all banking and government transactions, face reading machines should be linked. I think that's what he's talking about. There's another question on how will we identify if a person is doing multiple jobs in a forensic audit.
So if a person is doing multiple jobs, again, we are doing a lot of investigations in that area. So it's a combination of 3 different things. One, you would look at the sort of pattern when the person is logging in, logging off, how much time he is active on the system, not active on the system. And I'll segregate this into the services industry and then the non-services industry, because it's happening in the non-services industry also, by the way, right? Where salespeople in the FMCG, salespeople in the pharmaceutical industry are doing double jobbing. So let's look at the services industry where people are working from home online. So first you are identifying the pattern of their use. Second, you are actually sort of at different points in time sending different queries, asking people to come online for a sudden meeting, etc. So that is something that is being identified as a second step. Third, on the ground intelligence is being collected to identify if people are working for more than one organization. So wherein I think what is being done is that people are being approached as recruitment consultants to understand where they are working. Sometimes they say I'm working for X organization. Sometimes they say we are working for Y organization. You reach out to them as 2 different recruitment consultants, and they give different sort of employer name, and that's how you pick up that they are working with 2 different employers. So these are some examples through which you can pick up. Then the second part is on the ground, people are doing very difficult to identify, because if somebody is physically going as a med rep for X and med rep for Y, very difficult to identify. The only way to identify is to collect intelligence on the ground, as well as do again surprise visits, surprise interviews online to understand where that person is and what that person is doing. But that method I think is being used. I would say it's less of analytics over there, but more of I think intelligence that you need to gather.
Sure. There's a question from Rajesh Chakote whether the ebook is available for this publication.
So ebook would come in a month's time. So the Kindle version would be released in a month's time. But I would strongly recommend you have this book in hard copy, because it's more like a comprehensive reference book. So I'll just show you how the chapters are. So while the ebook is coming, but I am recommending personally people to actually take the hard copy of the book, because it has reference material for different topics that you can use for different purposes. So it's not like a one topic book which is like you can complete in one go. A lot of, I think, again, more than 100 case studies are there in this book.
I think it's a Bloomsbury publication, so I think people can go online and purchase it. There's a question on, what are the challenges in the digital economy today? For
Challenges from what perspective? So I don't want to sort of answer from a general perspective.
For emerging forensic data analytic tools for digital transactions,
No, I would rather not say challenges. I would say opportunities, because the way I think the economy and all organizations are moving towards digital, there are more and more opportunities for us to use analytics, to use forensic data analytics tool, and we can play actually a very, very important role in this entire process, because right from making sure that you're not onboarding a wrong customer or a wrong vendor or a wrong employee, to making sure that the transactions is happening in the right way, I would say that there are more opportunities for us. From a business point of view, there are a lot of challenges, because they need to sort of move from a mindset perspective, move from a business process perspective. But for us, I would say there are more and more opportunities. So good times for all of us over the next few years.
Sure. There's one thing posted here: online resource for the global list of sanctioned vendors, parties, free resource. I think there's a world check database, but I think
there are multiple databases. So if you are asking
is it free, Sandeep? World check? I thought it is a paid subscription or something.
No. There are today, I would say, about 50 odd databases that are available globally for you to access. Out of 50, I would say 40 are free. You can access those free. There are 10 which are subscribed, which are used in specific scenarios like ROC in India. You can get initial data from a Zaba, etc. But you want next level, you have to pay that fee and then get that data. Similarly, you want to get data from a Hong Kong registry. There is basic data that is available free, but then you want more details, you pay and then get it. You have the entire Paradise Papers, Panama Papers, available for free. So a lot of data is available free, but if you want to do a thorough check, make sure that you're also using the subscribed databases.
Sure. I think that helps, and I think there's how do you handle anonymous threats from fraudster when you are on field for investigation, specifically if you are in another state?
Yeah, I mean, we keep facing, but I would say that I think those are reduced over a period of time. So I'll just give you one example. So we are in a sort of a remote part of a country to review a distributor where we already established that the distributor has done fraud. And that's a very notorious, place. So we go and we have to interview the person. So we go over there. The person keeps one, sort of pistol on the table. The second pistol from second, pocket, and say, "Haji bolo." So you need to, I think, understand how that works. But I would say that I think that has reduced substantially over a period of time. The process that is followed is that you're always having two people, not one person. For any sort of intelligence you're doing on the ground, you're never alone. Second, where the threat perception is high, we say people come back rather than try to become heroes. There's no point becoming heroes. We are all professionals. So how do you handle this? Is you handle it smartly in a way that you're not confrontational. So I'll give you a few examples. So like some people come and say that this you should not report. So we say that I mean, you are late because we already sent the report. Right? So you're not confronting, you're not saying no, you're just, I think, saying that, okay, sorry, you're late, the report is already gone. Some people, what they'll try and do is that on the ground, when you're doing it, they'll try to, threaten. You say that, we may, if it is a professional organization, you would say that you'll have to formally, report, and then you would, sort of, raise that, issue so that the other person goes on the, back foot. If it is anonymous, there is very limited that you can do. You just carry on with your work and then go on. I can only tell you that unless it's like a mafia scenario, in most of the other cases, those threats are just to divert the process, nothing else.
Right, Sandeep. Sandeep, I have a question for you. You have written this wonderful book, and you have spent months or maybe years of experience that you have got over the period. Now, suppose one were looking at a mid-sized organization in the country, say 1,000 crores, 500 to 1,500 crores. The organization is not spending too much money on forensic consulting or to other things, but they have a very small, say 1 member, 2 member, 3 member internal department, in-house department. So what would be a good way, top 2 or 3 tips which you can give to such organizations on what would be a good way for a practicing chartered accountant or for an in-house small team of people with less resources to start onto this journey, sort of thing, how to look out for, how to help the organization and add value by looking at, forensics in their respective organizations. So according to you, what would be the starting point for the journey? What should they look out for and how they should implement that in their own organizations?
Very, very important question, Deepji. So I would say that was one of the objective when we started this journey, because I don't know if anyone on the call, I think Satish is there. I think Satish can, describe more better than me, because he is an independent person and he has gone through the, book in detail. This book, the way it is prepared, and I'll come 3 things. So I'm just covering the book. It's more of personal, thing, but I'll come to the 3 things. So one, I think the book describes in a very simple way, right from the concepts that needs to be, sort of understood, right? So what is fraud? What is forensic? What you need to know? What are the rules of evidence in India? What is considered as a, sort of evidence? What is not considered as an evidence? How do you detect fraud? How do you do investigation right from, initial engagement letter stage to a kind of a reporting, stage? How do you do an interview? How do you, sort of, do it? And there is a specific section on tips on investigation and then fraud risk management. That is like anybody can use it, smallest organization to the largest organization. So that is how the book has been prepared. Now, having said that, I would say this is one of the tools. The second tool that I would rely on is on the ICAI, sort of forensic standards that have been, issued by ICAI, which is the first institute across the globe to issue the standards. So that's the second tool that I would, utilize along with the course that they have. The third thing I would do is that I will do the CFE course from the ACFE, which is actually a very good course to understand the conceptual thing around fraud and then corruption, including why fraud happens, etc. So I'll use these aids, but I can assure you that anybody actually has gone, and I would request Satish to say a few words over here because he has gone through the books.
I think Satish had to leave. Yeah, because he just wrote to me. He had another session, so he just left 5 minutes back.
No problem. So I think I would recommend, I think you have a look at the, book. The details are available, of course, online. It will be a good aid, even if you are a 2-member team, 3-member team, you want to start off with this journey. It captures in detail what needs to be, done, and then you can start off from there. So plus, I would say you also, sort of for a critical cases, do a kind of a joint review, right? That's what I think we suggest people, right? If there is a critical review, and you're doing it for the first time, I would not advise you to, do experiment on that. Where you want to submit report to a regulator, where you want to submit a record to a, say, ROC, SEBI, etc. There, I would advise that you use a, external firm, take the help, understand how it is done, then going forward, do it, internally.
Sure. One other thing is, I just want to point out to all the participants that if you go to the Sama YouTube channel, as soon as the forensic accounting and investigation standards were released, a lot of expert speakers, those who are even part of the committee, were invited to speak about those standards and give examples. So that 4 hours video, 5 to 6 hours video on the standards is already available on Sama YouTube channel, which is a free resource. So people can access that and, look at that. A question which is being asked again here by Shiva Kumarji is, Sandeep, where can you buy this book?
It's online, right from Amazon to Meri Pustak to Tax Sutra. So it's available all over the place, including at professional bookstores in the respective cities. I mean, you just type the name of this book on the Google, you'll get all the links. And if required, I can say, I think you have, Deepji, the link. If you want to share with the group here, you can do that. You're on mute, Deepji.
Tomorrow morning, the first thing what we are going to do is, all those who have registered for this today's session, we'll send out a link to where you can purchase it, and also the name of this book and a background to this, the cover of this book, So we'll have all these details sent out to all the participants. And we'll also send out the personal email ID of Sandeep Baldavaji, so that if any of you want to contact him, you can do that to ask any more questions or any other things. Do you recommend to pursue CFE after completing DISA?
It can be done anytime. There's no link between DISA and then, CFE. Both are, I think, different. If you have the bandwidth and if you have the inclination, You can do both together or one after the other. So there is no preference. And for CFE, you don't have to go anywhere. The course material is available, online. You can write whenever you want. It's again online, multiple choice question test. So I think it's not, sort of very difficult, but it gives you a good understanding of how these things works across the globe, not just in India.
There's just one last question we'll pick up. Where can we get practical experience in forensic investigation and fraud reporting? We have enough books, but very less practical examples. So I can say from experience, before Sandeep talks about it, that this book has a lot of practical experience. So if one were to not only look at the theoretical structure which is there, but also the practical experiences, the case studies which are there, which will be helpful. So I think
there are more than 100 case studies and case laws within this. So each case study is explained in terms of what is the background, what work steps were performed, how the case was cracked, and what was discovered and what remediation was done. So it has, details, available over there. At the same time, I would say that today there's a lot of material available, and I put that in the book as well. For example, if you study the entire CWG scam, sort of report of CAG, which is available in public domain, it's like a Bible on the procurement frauds.
Yes. I would also like to just point out that if somebody goes to the ICISA site of CAG, they have this IT institute in Noida. So there is a ICISA site, ICISA site. If you go there, then all the work that the CAG has done, including the fraud findings, because they are in public domain, they have been put there out there as case studies. So people can just go there and read those case studies, how they used various analytical tools and how they carried out what is the methodology, what work they did, what was the sample size, how they found frauds, and what their findings are. So all that is available to an IT auditor, to a forensic auditor, and so on. So that is also a great resource one can refer to.
Correct.
So I think it's just great insights about the banking frauds investigation. Thanks a lot. So I think Sandeep, wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very, very much for sparing time for all of us.
Thanks for inviting, Deepji. Always a pleasure to, sort of interact with you.
And thank you very much to all the lovely participants and the wonderful participation which was there. A lot of questions and a lot of enquiries into this area, because I think that's, as Sandeep said, this is a great opportunity for all of us professionals.
Absolutely.
Not only to carry out work in India, but to carry out work across the world.
Absolutely.
So I think a great opportunity. So thank you once again, Sandeep. Thanks a lot to all the participants. Looking forward to the next session next week on 7 p.m. where we have Neeraj Kumar from Oyo Hotels and Homes coming in to share his experience on analytics. So thank you very much. Thanks
Fantastic, a lot. And all the best, Deepji. Fantastic job that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. Thanks a lot.